Hi everybody, thanks very much for joining us. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Peter Llewellyn. I run the services, information services, activities, resources at MedComms, networking.com and the associated websites. So resources for people who work in and around the global MedComms community, by which I'm talking medical education, medical communications, medical publishing and associated type businesses, but also importantly for people who want to find out more about the business. So we've got a lot of resource, for instance, at firstmedcommsjob.com, where you'll find information if you're interested in a job in this business. We're doing lots of videos, webinar type content like this at the moment. It's great fun because we can get people in from all over the world. Again, we've got a useful audience from far and wide. You'll find all the webinars are recorded and then collated at NetworkPharma TV, where you'll now find hundreds of videos like this and others as well. So there's a big resource there for anyone in and around the business. Today, I'm so delighted that we've got the guys from AMICULUM, and we're going to talk about, basically, we're going to talk about establishing a new agency, I guess, but an important part of this is just thinking about what MedComms is about these days, where it's going, and the sort of important questions when you're setting up a business in MedComms, like the culture and organization and so on. But as I say, it's within the context of a changing sort of business. So I won't steal their thunder. Kirsty, I'm going to hand over to you for presentation, and then we're going to have a Q&A session at the end. So Kirsty, over to you.
Sure. Thank you everyone for joining. I think in the UK we're competing against the sun, so it's good to see so many of you here. We're going to spend a little bit of time talking about building an agency fit for the future. We're going to introduce you to AMICULUM and Cogent and think about some of the things that we thought about when we started Cogent, specifically the culture and core values. We'll also talk a little bit, as Peter said, about the future of MedComms and what are the trends and themes that will be important for all of us and all of our agencies as we move forward and make sure we're fit for the future. So we wanted to start by thinking about what a future agency might look like. So in our minds, we would be talking to ever more data-driven clients. We'll be talking about digital therapies, 3D printed drugs. We'll be way beyond omni-channel, whatever that looks like, targeting channels that haven't been invented yet, talking to audiences with different needs and different behaviours to now. Our working lives will be really different. What it feels like to work at a good agency or what good working life looks like will have a whole new meaning. And candidates that come into our businesses and into our industry will be thinking ever more about social impact, thinking about their own values and beliefs and how they want to match those to companies they work for and the communities within their workplaces. So we're going to talk about all of that in the next 30 minutes. But before we launch in, we're going to tell you a little bit about AMICULUM and Cogent, in case you're not already aware. So AMICULUM is obviously the agency we all chose. We're in our 21st year, going from our 2 founders to a team of over 350 today across 9 countries. We have 11 specialist branded agencies, of which Cogent is the newest. One of the really great things about working for an independent agency is that we can explore opportunities more easily and set up agencies in response to that. So that could be for specialisms. So for instance, our rare disease agency, Camradis, or it could be to sort of explore or broaden our footprint when it comes to healthcare communications and provide opportunities for the team. And that's what Cogent is. We're a full service agency, and we brought together members from AMICULUM to start Cogent, and then with a focus on looking at the capabilities that we might need to be future fit in the future. The other things that we needed to think about were what the industry looks like today. So I think we've all seen in recent times the industry is growing. It's changing quite rapidly. We're seeing mergers and acquisitions happen. We're seeing that we have to differentiate more for our clients in terms of our capabilities and services, but also for candidates. I think we all know what the market's like at the moment. ever more, certainly within Cogent and within AMICULUM, we're thinking about how other industries affect what we do and taking inspiration from other industries. And thinking about our everyday lives, thinking about how we engage, how we consume content, and what that means for good medical communications. The other thing that was really important to us was thinking about the look and feel of Cogent, and as such the culture and the values, to make sure we can bring together a team that all has the same culture and values. We're really lucky in that we had a good foundation in AMICULUM. We already have culture and values which are shared, so it was really a case of building on that.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about the shared culture at AMICULUM and at AMICULUM as a whole. So this is across a number of agencies, regional teams, and therefore different geographical cultures, and of course our support teams. And what we're referring to is really the tone that sets the environment at AMICULUM and the wider sense of team and the security that we have. So thinking about what shapes our culture, and this is really in addition to the structure of our business and our leadership style. There are a number of things, but one of the things is that we really encourage learning and development that's tailored to each individual, and we don't have set career paths. So this has worked really, really well for AMICULUM as a business, and actually the majority of our agencies and teams are led by colleagues who've been promoted into leadership roles and have kind of grown up with the business, and Kirsty's one example. And second element of this is of the shared culture are the values that underpin this, and the values really highlight what it is that's important to AMICULUM, and they also inform our day-to-day behaviours. So just to move on to our values. So on this slide, you can see what our values are. You've got a better idea of what we're referring to. And as we grow, it's been really, really important to maintain the feel of the business. Our founders now can't always reach everyone individually. And so the values really aim to distill some of this for all of us, for everyone and everyone that joins. So Debbie and I are just going to touch on how we at AMICULUM demonstrate our values. So one of the kind of factors and one of the reasons we have our values is to support with decision making. So we intend for the values to guide decisions that we make, so decisions we make as individuals or as teams and agencies, and making sure that they really are right for each other in our teams and of course the business. And it allows us to have the same frame of reference. So by that, it's a common understanding. We know what the expectations are, and ultimately to help with our confidence when we do come to a decision or when we're going through a decision-making process. Also important, and another way that we use our values is to help us when we're thinking about a business plan, and that could be overall or it could be for each agency, and actually Nikki will talk a little bit more about this in a moment, but it can also be to do with any new initiatives. So we link back to our values, and this helps us to test our thinking a little bit, check that we're on the right path, and the purpose is really to help us build our overall help us build our AMICULUM business on our existing culture and develop that culture. One example I'll just talk about is a new initiative that we've been introducing very recently, and it's to do with more open, direct, ongoing feedback between colleagues, and that really is for their own engagement and development. And when we've introduced this, we've been able to, it's been really helpful to be able to link back to our values. They're all relevant, but particularly those of individuals, fairness and integrity. And it's just made it a little bit more, brought it to life and made it a little bit more meaningful for everyone as we're referring back to already understood and shared concepts.
And our shared culture of collaboration values the idea that we are better together. So at AMICULUM, we've built collaboration into processes of how we do our work every day. So for example, when we have new starters joining, we arrange dedicated get-togethers for them to meet each other and connect so that they can start to build those relationships early on in their career at AMICULUM. At Cogent, we're also really acutely aware that not being in the office so much, we might be missing out on that sharing of ideas that you would naturally get when you're all sitting together. So we've set up dedicated meetings for our writers. For example, we've got our writers rendezvous where we get together, we just chat about what we're doing, just to share those ideas and build those strong foundations as well. We also use Yammer a lot, which is kind of like a workplace Facebook. We use it to connect socially. We've got, book clubs, cooking clubs on there, various fun things, but also more business orientated groups for knowledge sharing. And this collaboration across the agencies helps us to expand our own skill sets, but also improve our offerings to clients. And our shared culture and values that we have allows us to work in the same way and present to the client as one team. So we know that collaborative cultures can be as much as 5 times more high performing, but more importantly, feeling part of a team means that we're more energetic, we're more productive, and this leads to better engagement and also the high retention that we see at AMICULUM.
So one of the things that we talked about quite a lot when we were planning this and discussing this and the values is how the values and living the values is up to absolutely everyone, and therefore everyone has a role in shaping a culture and ultimately the success of the business. So it's not up to a particular population, those with a certain tenure or those who are at a certain point in their careers. There really are actions for each of us. And that's why it's often said that the culture is the sum of its parts. And really importantly, we set an example for each other.
So you've heard a bit there about how important core values are for setting expectations and driving behaviour, and how every individual is an important part of that. So AMICULUM's culture and core values were top of our minds when we were starting to and are hiring for Cogent and thinking about how we make sure that our team is fit for the future. So it's obviously important that when we're interviewing, we get a feel for what's important to the individual candidates. We ask questions such as, what are you looking for in MedComms? Why AMICULUM? To get a feel for what their values are. But it's also really important that the candidates get a feel for our values so they can decide if we're the right agency for them and somewhere they can see themselves long time, somewhere that they can thrive. Because obviously no one wants to hire someone who won't be happy, and you want your new employees to thrive, help the team thrive, especially in a small team where each individual can have such a big impact. So we talk about our culture, our values, our different initiatives that we're doing. And we also try to demonstrate our values during the hiring process, because we do live and breathe our values. They do come across in our interactions. They're also integrated into our process itself. For example, when candidates send in applications, they're all anonymized, so it's as fair as we can make it. And we try to help candidates to learn something during the process, whether it's about what MedComms is or some constructive feedback on writing tests, and ensuring that they feel that the time that they've committed to us for that is valued. And we're looking for how they respond as well. What resonates with them when we're discussing our culture? What excites them? But we're not looking for one answer. There is no right or wrong answer. People can share the same values, but in different ways and have different ideas. And we really value that diversity in personalities and different backgrounds and different career paths, because everyone has something different to contribute. And Cogent is young. We're a small team. And our culture, our individual feel of Cogent within AMICULUM is still evolving with every new team member. And we want our team members to be excited about being involved in defining that process. We recently did an exercise where we asked our team to decide where we sat on a series of scales. For example, did we feel brave or safe or process-driven or people-driven? Because we want to know how the team see us, and is this what we need in order to be fit for the future? So having a strong, aligned team with a shared culture and shared values is really integral. They are our biggest asset when building our culture and growing as Cogent, and making sure that we as Cogent are fit for the future.
Thanks, Nikki. So moving on from culture and values, we also wanted to discuss what's going to be important for all of our agencies across the industry in the future, whether that be, what will our future candidates and team members expect? What role will political and societal changes make? So we've put together 4 topics here. Please feel free to add some notes, comments, questions in the chat, but we'll kick off with Debbie.
Thanks. So sustainability and corporate responsibility. Pharma is 55% more emissions intensive than the car industry, which is huge. And obviously with this global shift towards achieving a sustainable future, there's even more pressure on the pharma industry to commit to making a positive impact on the environment and society. So an example of this is that pharma giants have recently signed up to the Energize program. This plans to facilitate decarbonization of energy for the supply chain in Europe and the US. So hopefully in future, we'll see better adoption of renewable energy and reduced greenhouse emissions. But in terms of how this might affect how we as agencies operate, I'm going to throw a question to Kirsty just to ask, have you seen any impact in how this move towards sustainability might affect how we run as an agency?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're seeing more and more the question being asked in RFIs, in ad hoc conversations with procurement, and in our MSA discussions. Obviously, some of these big corporations have targets to meet, especially when it comes to being net zero. So we've got a responsibility as well as being part of that value chain. So I think we're going to see it more and more and take more and more responsibility as our part of that in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I think collaboration and innovation will be a powerful force for change together. And as agencies, we obviously need to be seen to be supporting these changes. But so being sustainable is also important when it comes to attracting employees. So we know that I think it's nearly 40% of millennials, who are the biggest workforce at the moment, they've taken a job because of the company's environmental responsibility. And they're even willing to take a pay cut to work for a company with a good track record of sustainability. So not having a track record in place can mean losing out on good people. And MedComms has traditionally involved a lot of travel, for example, but people might not want to work for a company if they were conscious of their carbon footprint, where they might need to travel a lot.
Yeah, different pharmaceutical companies are also having different approaches to what they want to do with travel. Some of them are being more hybrid approach, some of them are being encouraging face-to-face. And I think that's actually going to be have an impact, obviously, on MedComms as well, because it might, different clients will want different things, and you could find that lots of clients aren't asking for so much travel or face-to-face.
Yeah, that's a good point, Nikki. But I mean, sustainability is not just about the environment as well. It's also about empowering patients to take charge of their health and their own well-being. It's about improving access to medicines for patients, to access to healthcare, especially for those underserved populations as well. So I think we're in a unique position as healthcare communicators. So let's use our skills to spread the word and work towards this ideal of net zero sustainable healthcare.
Thanks, Debbie. So moving on to our next topic, you probably won't surprise that diversity, equity, and inclusion made our list. It's becoming ever more important and not something that's done reactively or something that's a nice to have. We're still, as many people in the industry are, many companies in the industry are, at an early stage. It'll be really interesting to see in the future what a mature strategy and a mature program looks like, and what a truly inclusive workplace environment looks like, where we can all bring our unique selves and our life experiences to work and to what we do. And that's everything from race and ethnicity to gender, identity and expression, to neurodiversity, to thinking about the aging population. It's thinking about all of these things and everyone bringing their unique selves to work. We also need to think about how it appears in our everyday, like Trish was explaining. It's our values are what we see, and it needs to be a real part of that. We also need to be communicating externally so that we can attract a diverse workforce. I know that, Trish, when we were talking about this, you were mentioning that you were asking businesses when you were interviewing pre-AMICULUM, you were asking the question.
Absolutely, I was interested to know, and I think beyond a statement on a website, which some companies had, some companies didn't have, just what was on the agenda and how it felt internally. And I think we will probably, increasingly, even people are increasingly thinking about this, which absolutely we should be. And even if individuals are not asking at interviews, then I'm sure they are thinking about it. It's such a broad, impactful topic that we are becoming much better educated about. But I suppose, on that note, Kirsty, if you were asked how diverse is MedComms, what would you say?
That's a good question, a hard question. I haven't seen any stats in terms of MedComms. I think the nearest I've ever seen is in marketing. Please, if anyone has any stats or is looking into it, please pop a note in the chat. Anecdotally, and using race and ethnicity as an example, I don't often see faces like mine. I would love to see more. I'm fully aware that it's an industry challenge. I think in the future, and this is across all industries, it's no longer going to be an excuse, if you like, that there isn't diversity within the pipeline in terms of who's coming through. So we need to be thinking about why that is now, looking at the barriers, whether that be equity in STEM education, whether that be thinking about social mobility, and whether that affects higher education, and whether higher education needs to look completely different to ensure that diverse, especially in science, that diverse population. So yeah, a long way to go, and lots to look and think about. Just quickly, in terms of pharma, I think we've been seeing some really positive changes. I think the past few years has highlighted inequalities when it came to anything from, the vaccine takeout and rollout, and to clinical trial recruitment. Debbie and I were having a chat about this, and I know you're quite pleased to see some of the initiatives, Debbie, in terms of publications and recruitment.
Yeah, so there's been a call to action recently to improve diversity in clinical trial participation, since we know very well how much ethnicity and age, for example, can affect treatment response and safety. And minority groups are so often poorly represented, and this can make them really vulnerable. Just as an example, Black people are 30% more likely to die from heart disease than white people, and yet they account for less than 3% of cardiology trial participants. So, I mean, this is a really woeful underrepresentation. And we know that journals like New England Journal of Medicine are supporting taking action with this. They now require a summary of how representative a study is of the real world target population for a paper to be published there. So it's a small start, but it's a step in the right direction.
Yeah, completely agree. It feels that the actions that are taking now are maybe heading in the right direction, maybe partly reactive, and it'll be great to see what comes along in the next few years. Thanks, Debbie. So moving on to our next topic, and just a quick reminder to put comments and queries in the chat.
So greater flexibility and unconventional ways of working. We couldn't be more aware, I think, that the pandemic has really accelerated flexibility. So just thinking beyond this to probably a good few years in the future, potentially across industries, there are lots of ideas as to how we may be working. Two that I'd like to touch on today. So one is the way in which teams are formed and really work together in an increasingly virtual world. And the second is to do with greater flexibility and moving away from working patterns and really focusing on contribution. So the first, the thinking behind the way in which teams may routinely be formed and a change there. So currently and pre-COVID, businesses have tended to set up teams that are influenced by location, often to do with working hours and proximity, and doing so to build a closeness within a team. Now, working remotely has meant for many of us that location is less of a factor, and that's reduced some of the barriers or maybe perceived barriers for people to connect. So expanding this idea, we may see that companies opt to regularly or more regularly form small, autonomous, flexible teams rather than more permanent team structures that we're more used to. Now, doing so would provide the opportunity to have more of an agile team setup where factors can be factors such as capacity, timelines, and specific skills and experience can be considered and considered alongside the kind of the immediate needs. So teams would then form, work together, and disassemble as needs projects, and I would hope individual interests change, and this could be on a relatively short-term basis or a longer-term basis, but overall could be moving away from a dedicated client team. Now, I think there's a real sense that technology could continue to aid this, potentially with language software and real-time translation, and that really helping us to work and speak with colleagues across languages, across cultures, with little loss of context or meaning. The second idea is to do with an individual's contribution rather than their working patterns. So just a little bit of context. The pandemic, as I think we'd probably recognise, has led to many people really reassessing what's important to them and the balance that they can create in their lives. And really critical to this is having control over your time. We have so much flexibility in other parts of our lives, so much is on demand, and we're not really constrained by time and place. So it makes sense to think about how this is going to relate to work and how it already relates to work. We may well see a shift from measuring inputs, so things like hours worked, working patterns, to measuring outcomes and outputs, so delivering on a particular piece of work, achieving outcomes. Now, if this is the case and that recognition shifts to being about contribution, then we're likely to see greater autonomy in terms of decision making when it comes to factors of time and place. Now, there are already organisations working in this way, or if they're not doing so fully, then they're doing so in some form. One example is that of unlimited holiday. So with this, the thinking is that if working set hours are irrelevant, then an annual leave entitlement may actually be redundant, really. The individual can decide if and when they can take either a few hours a week, a few days, They are the ones making the decision, and they are really in control of that. And Nikki, when we were talking, you had a really interesting observation related to this.
Yes, we were saying that this could actually be really beneficial for those people who've got an outside hobby or interest that's I suppose evolved into something a bit more than just an interest, that become a job, as like a sideline. People who are also like influencers, or they do upcycling and then sell their work, those sort of things. So I can see that sort of speaking to people's like a holistic lifestyle.
Yeah, absolutely. Very real examples of what people want to do, and how they want to split their time, and how they define their roles, their core day to day and beyond.
So our last point is on team and career development. So everything that everyone's talked about now on corporate responsibility, diversity, flexibility, all of those I think are going to have quite a big impact on a team and career development, because they'll affect who is going to be working in MedComms, how they want to work in MedComms, and when they want to work in MedComms. So in addition to those, one of the things that we also talked about was changes in higher education. So I think we've all probably heard that higher education is evolving. Perhaps it's becoming a bit more skills-based or vocational. I mean, perhaps in the future we'll have MedComms specific online courses. But universities are always trying to prepare students for a future work environment that is unknown. So it's really interesting to see what the future candidates coming through that process will be like. And Debbie, you had a good observation on this.
Yeah, so I mean, just talking about the future jobs being unknown, I read that I think it's 85% of jobs in 2030, as early as 2030, haven't even been created yet. And I mean, things like AI are going to continue to have an impact. Like, we're going to increasingly adopt tools. Like in MedComms, we've already started to use tools like, the literature search tools. There have been, examples of higher level of editorial skills with AI writing, Congress abstracts and papers, and that. Obviously, there's a long way to go, but we also need to think about what AI approaches we can use from other industries in future as well. So I think, it's all going to change a lot in future, and we just need to run with it, I guess.
And the other industries thing is also very important, because we're seeing a lot of people coming in from other industries into MedComms. People are interested in career mobility. So they bring in different skill sets, and they're going to have different developmental needs. For example, someone might be coming in from another industry with previous line management experience, but as a completely new writer. So how they develop, what they want to develop, will be very different from someone coming in as a graduate. So line managers need to be equipped to manage this. They need to be aware of the different motivations, different prior experience, how they want each of their team members want to evolve. They're going to need to be agile, and they need to be able to manage variety in team as that team mix and background changes and evolves. And Trish, you had a thought about this around the diverse flexibility of working.
Yeah, thanks, Nikki. Absolutely. So it's everything that you said, and it's also about supporting line managers so that they can feel confident managing team members who opt to work kind of any working pattern. When I say any, I'm talking about hybrid or from home or in the office. I think and we need to keep in mind that whilst working from home has been probably a positive for lots of us, there is also a population, might be larger than we think, who actually want to be in the office. So making sure that everyone continues to feel included, and this is going to take getting used to for team members and for line managers.
Yeah, so I think it's really important that we develop and nurture these skills in our line managers and ensure that they are prepared to be agile and flexible to evolve and develop for the different members of the team, and as the teams evolve and change.
Fabulous, thanks, Nikki. With that, we'd love to open to questions, hear any comment? What are your thoughts, Peter?
Great, thank you very much. If we can lose the slides and just have us again. That was, it's really interesting. We covered a lot of ground there. I like to think that people will today or come back and look at the video and will watch something like that, and they'll, like within the agencies, teams of people will sit and watch that, and they'll talk about themselves and what they've done and what their plans are and things like, because there's a lot of issues in there. And I know we've specifically used Cogent as the example, but all those issues affect everybody, sort of thing. And this is a changing business. I think it's been interesting over the last couple of years, as well as MedComms generally has adapted. And I know that we were going down the right line of flexible working and all the rest of it before the pandemic. But I found it interesting that for me, it heightened the fact there was a spectrum. There were newer agencies who were much more agile and much more flexible than some agencies that have been around 20 years and so on. And it was just a fundamental fact, that if you're set up in a certain way and you're a certain size, it might be more difficult to just pivot, as we all like to call it. And that process is accelerating and going on and so on. And as a new agency within an agency or a family of agencies that's 21 years old, that, I'm not going to pin you down here, but it must be interesting to see what you can do differently to the way maybe it's being done in some of the other agencies. I find all that interesting, and I would love to be a fly on the wall in some of the some other rooms when they're talking about this sort of stuff. A couple of things I thought we've only got a few minutes maybe, but I would just want to pick up on a couple of things. Let's go back to the beginning and the culture thing. I find it interesting listening to people talk about the culture, and often the words are similar. Nobody says I'm going to be a sweatshop and I'm going to break everybody, and you know what I mean? It's all about quality and inclusivity and blah, 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 blah. But I can never really quite define what culture is. What I know is if I can line 10 MedComms agencies up, like I do maybe at a careers event or something, and I talk to people, I get a sense, I can get quite a dramatic sense sometimes of how different these agencies are. But I don't know how to define that, articulate it really beyond, isn't it? If you meet people in real life, you get a sense of that. I just wondered, I'm not trying to be provocative here, but I just wondered how much you distinguish, having the core values, which everyone understands, so you've got an answer, from actually just people. Just what I mean? Because you're not all robots adhering to a set of values. You're actually people. And it's interesting how the things merge. I don't know, cleverer people than me maybe to explain that better, but I find that an interesting point. Have you got a view on it? And within AMICULUM, how different are the cultures within the family of AMICULUM? Can you answer that?
I think it's, do you want me to start guys? I think it's a really interesting point, and you're quite right that you see similar words used, especially in terms of values, but I think the difference is how you live and breathe them and making sure that you actually use them. So for instance, collaboration being one of ours. I've worked in other agencies where collaboration probably was a value, but there are walls between agencies. You're not all as one agency, whereas at AMICULUM it is very much like, the person in the next agency, another agency to you would collaborate with, and you go into those relationships and discussions thinking about collaboration first. It's always collaboration first. It's AMICULUM first, and working with each other so that we best get the best end result. It's not about one-upmanship between agencies, and it's something that we live and breathe every day. You are right, it's hard to articulate. It's definitely a feeling within an agency, and we've talked about, isn't it a shame that if we could just sort of bottle the feeling and then give it to someone for them to experience for a day, whilst they're doing their interview, then they would understand what we mean. But yeah, describing it is really, really difficult. I'll throw that.
And just to cut in on that point, and maybe someone else has a comment on this, but we ended talking about working practices, and it's just, again, it's fascinating to see how working practices have changed, and there's a whole spectrum of opinion out there, of what's good and bad about that, and whether they do or don't want to go back or forwards or whatever else sort of thing. But there is still fundamentally, I think, a matter of fact, that if you're all spread out and not meeting each other, it's more difficult to get that sense of culture. It must be, mustn't it? You're not in the same room. And I know we're all wrestling with this sort of point, but maybe a couple of the others can just comment on that, because you're all speaking from home today. I think I'm right in saying, but correct me if I'm wrong, that you're sort of operating sort of hybrid culture, but people lose that cultural glue when they're not actually with each other, and new people must find it a bit difficult to tune in a bit. And I know, as I say, I know this is a big topic. So just a couple of comments. Who could sort of talk a bit? And Trish, maybe I'm gonna pick Trish, whatever, because you're talking to people coming into the business. How do you see it from your point of view?
I absolutely, it is a challenge. No getting away from that. I do think, however, in terms of our office setup, kind of pre-pandemic, it was, you know, for example, our London office was not just one agency, so we had a number of different colleagues from different agencies, different support teams. So that maybe hasn't meant so much of a change. In terms of individuals joining the business and their onboarding, I think that has probably been more of a challenge for them and their line managers than it was pre-pandemic. And part of it is that there isn't that social learning. So you're not sitting next to somebody, you know, overhearing something and, you know, incorporating that in your decisions or whatever you're doing just because of location. So there absolutely are challenges.
And the fact that we make it work doesn't negate the fact that there were advantages to that. And that's what I find fascinating, because it's very easy to go, look, we're doing really well in MedComms, so obviously it didn't matter. It sort of does, and you don't know what you don't know, and you don't know what you're missing is sort of one of my questions. I don't know, Nikki, you look like you're going to jump in there. Have you got a thought on that?
I was going to say that actually, I think that we've done really well at developing a real team feel and culture within Cogent, despite the fact we're hybrid, we're mostly all remote, and we are working across the whole country and have team members in other countries as well. We've put quite a lot of effort, I think, into having lots of tea chats, both as an agency and individually, like small groups, and encouraging that everyone to have tea chats with people outside of Cogent, but with other people, to get to know other people within AMICULUM. We also do some really nice social things that just bring a bit of fun in and give a real flavour and a feel for what we want to be in Cogent. Silly little things like we have a icebreaker at the beginning of every single Cogent meeting, which we have monthly, and we've done silly things like a zombie apocalypse plan, and it just sort of gives a feel, and we get lots of in-jokes, and we're still developing that culture. We just need to make that effort to think about it and make sure it is happening. We're creating the opportunities for it to happen.
And again, I'm being slightly provocative here, but you know, there's a tendency when we're talking culture and so on to talk about the fun side of it. The sort of, you know, we have a chat and we socialize, but culture is about the business and the organization and certain ways of doing things and standards. And it's very easy to say, well, we produce top quality work because everybody does, sort of thing. But you know what I mean? Again, on that front, I don't know. Again, Debbie, I'm going to pick you just to bring you in on this one. I mean, how do you deal with that? Do you understand what I'm saying there? Because it's not just the we'll chat to each other. I mean, as much as that's important, it's there are certain ways of doing things here which we believe are very important, and how, you know, you've got to get everyone to tune into that. Do you agree or not?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, I mean, even just as an example, one of our accounts is a complete collaboration with Everder, another one of our sister agencies, and it works very well. We put, you know, the client sees us as AMICULUM, as one team. You know, we communicate, we work in the same way. You know, we talk about how we might grow the account together. You know, we come up with a plan to engage with the client proactively. So it's and you know, we are one team essentially, and we have that same shared culture and values. So we do present as one team, and we have the same goals. Like Kirsty mentioned, it's not about one-upmanship. It's not about one agency being better than the other. We are unified, and we want to build and grow accounts and grow the business together.
I'm sticking on provocative questions, maybe, so just kick back if you want to. But if I met somebody from each of the, is it 9 members of the family, AMICULUM family, do you think I could tell which member of the family you were from? I mean, is it as strong as that? I'm being slightly flippant about this, but I know there's the AMICULUM values and then there's the individual values. I don't know. Could you? And are you trying to do that or not? Again, Kirsty, am I making some sense? You know what I'm getting at. I'm being slightly flippant about it, but you know what I'm saying.
Absolutely.
How far can you go with that one?
I think if you asked any member of the 11 agencies how it feels to be, that's okay, how it feels to be at AMICULUM, what's important, what's important to the founders, what's important to us as an agency, I think everyone would respond the same. I think if you ask them about their specialisms and what they're interested in, what they're working on, that would be different. But how they go about that would be the same. How they want to be enterprising, how we want to be individual, how we all don't have job titles and we're supporting all our career paths. All of those things are common across AMICULUM. You do have personalities, if you like, across different agencies, but that's still an expression of the same culture and values. So I think more than anywhere that I've certainly worked previously, that's definitely the case, that the umbrella agency, if you like, is the thing that drives the culture and the values.
Okay. But again, it just shows how complicated it all is and how wrapped up with the personality and the chemistry is. Sorry, I cut across you there, Debbie. Sorry, you were trying to say something.
I was just going to comment. So just as an example, myself, Nikki and Kirsty have all come from different agencies within AMICULUM, and we've, brought together that experience. We work very well together because we have that similar foundation as well. And I mean, it's working well.
Yeah. No, I get that. I'm just trying to challenge the thinking, and hopefully that people will sit in their own areas and think about this a little bit. And how do you do, how do you refer it to yourselves? Brian came in very early on. Let's just cover this one off. Brian came in very early on, and what he's getting at here is, how do you sort of, I guess, prove it to yourself? How do you what activities have you undertaken to embed them? How do you ensure that they're driving behaviours? I don't know. Do you do annual surveys, or I don't know what the idea would be, but having tried to establish the culture, and we can talk about it, but do you actually have in place some way of saying we're actually living up to the values and we can improve them, or we can whatever? Or is there something like that? Again, I'm trying not to put words in your mouth, and Kirsty, I guess I'm looking at you again, but how do you decide whether you're actually delivering on those values, or is that just a silly question?
No, not at all. I think it's an ongoing thing, and it's something that you can't take your eye off, I think. Trish can probably speak to this better than I can, but she explained when it comes to clear review, when it comes to our annual reviews, we talk about our values all the time. If we're doing, for some team presentations, they might focus on a certain element of our values. So I think it's about, you sort of have to be proactive in putting them out to the team members, and then I think eventually they become embedded, but you can't sort of rest on your laurels and expect to print out a card and send it out and expect everyone to remember what the values are, because that doesn't mean anything. It's almost better if they can feel them and could describe them, and perhaps if they don't remember all the words, that it's not the worst thing in the world, as long as they know what they are inherently. So it's
a reference and it's a structure, and you're constantly referring back to it, and it gives you a framework to work around.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Trish, have you got a comment on that?
I was going to say more or less that, and I think it is, we've been working to really try to embed our values, and it takes time. It takes current team members and team members who join us, I think, really feeling that. And just one other example, our values are, when we give each other feedback, we try to relate to our values. So just trying to put them into practice regularly, and hold each other to account in a way, and be a good example for each other. So seeing each other living the values, I think, is probably the most powerful thing.
Okay. We focus quite a lot on the culture type part of this discussion, right? And I think that I've made a conscious decision. I don't know whether that was the right one or the wrong one to take, and people will criticize me later, but I thought, in the few minutes we had, let's focus a bit more on that, but let's not ignore what else you covered, because each of those other 1, 2, 3, 4 points, sustainability, DEI, working practices, team and career development, could take us off in, we could have a webinar on each of those sorts of things. And I think it's you covered some quite interesting points. And the only, I was simply going to say, and to be honest, Kirsty, when you were talking, I was going to say, sort of I almost jumped in and said, there isn't a lot of publicly available data, as it were, on MedComms business and how it really is profiled. There is some, and for instance, the annual workforce survey that I've been involved in the last 4 years, does profile the audience to a certain extent, and the thing that I can be a bit flippant about, you'll allow me to be, is 75% of people in the business are women, so this sort of a situation for me is not unusual. I'm trying to hold up the male sort of corner, probably inadequately. But it's overwhelmingly female, for instance, and that's an interesting area of discussion because it makes it different to lots of other businesses in the first place, sort of thing. The sort of diversity side in terms of ethnicity and so on. I mean, it's quite clear to all of us. And Kirsty, you said there aren't many people like me, and I know what you meant by that. And that was backed up by the data, sort of thing. I know there's lots of initiatives to try and improve diversity, but I think you also touched on it. I mean, it goes back to the sorts of people we recruit from in education, and so on. And we can't change the world entirely. But I do think that more talking about this, more data, but it is difficult in MedComms to measure anything, sort of thing, yeah. But there is some data there, and it's worth having a look at and thinking about it. And the other thing, I think there was a third thing, I've forgotten what it is, so I've lost my track there. So apologies for that. Oh, sorry, what I was going to say was, in fact, it was this. We did a meeting before Christmas when we were looking at people. I can't remember the title of it now, but it was like, succeeding in MedComms despite what life throws at you, sort of thing. And the idea is that we've all got problems and stuff going on in our personal life, and some of it might be very sort of backgroundy stuff, and some of it might be overt. But what we were also, frankly, trying to do were finding people who were physically disabled or whatever, and you go, there aren't many. It's just quite difficult. Why is this business actually the way it is? And I know we talk about it, but are we changing? And what I find interesting, and it's a whole different webinar, is how much the last couple of years and changing working practice does open up the opportunity for more diversity across the board, geographically, all sorts of things. But will it actually in practice? And I think that's just an interesting question, which I'd like people to be debating more and proving more in actual practice. And I will just leave it like that, sort of thing. But I do feel quite strongly that there's a bit of talking the talk. Are we walking the walk? And what does that mean in practice? And it might be more challenging than maybe it seems. So I just want to leave that out there. But I do think we should probably call a halt there because we've gone on a bit too long there, and I just enjoy this sort of conversation. So without further ado, what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw the line there. I'm going to say a huge thank you to panelists. Thank you very much for jumping on board. To the audience who are there, thank you very much for coming and joining in, and thank you for your questions. We have got some questions here. We probably haven't covered them off entirely. We've got a few minutes left when we stop the recording, and we'll come back to a couple of things there. Importantly, a lot of the point of these webinars is to make connections now, and I want people in the audience or people watching the video to make connections with yourselves. And I know you're all very happy to hear from people. LinkedIn is the easy way of doing it. So please, guys, talk to each other. I think there's a lot of interesting discussion points in there. And from my point of view, if you're interested in what I'm doing, go to medcommsnetworking.com. If you're interested in these webinars, NetworkPharma TV, this recording should be up there later on. I'm sure it'll be up later on today, and so on and so forth. So and frankly, I'm always happy to hear from anybody. So do give me a shout if I can help. But on that note, and in these rather strange and uncertain times, I'm going to wish you a good day. So thank you to the panelists, and see you all soon. Yeah, take care. Bye.
Thanks.